This is Research Like a Pro, episode 179, RLP with DNA Study Group, Part 8, Report Writing. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the creators of the Amazon best-selling book, Research Like a Pro, a Genealogist Guide. I'm Nicole, co-host of the podcast. Join Diana and me as we discuss how to stay organized, make progress in our research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Research Like a Pro.
Hi, Nicole. How are you today?
Well, I am a little bit sick from Thanksgiving. We all shared germs and got sick, but I think I'm recovering. So if my voice sounds a little scratchy, that's why. How are you and what have you been doing?
I am getting ready to do a fun webinar tomorrow. So by the time this episode comes out, it will already be done and hopefully available for people to watch. It's for the Alumni Learning Consortium, and it's an interesting group. What they do is go out and find authors to come and speak, do a lunchtime webinar for universities. So every university has alumni association, and if they're part of this group, then they can tie into these lunchtime webinars. Usually they do business or productivity type things, but they've been branching out and wanted to do something about family history and genealogy. So I will be doing a fun webinar, and because this is a group that's probably not genealogists, I thought I would do something just to introduce people to the idea of how fun it is to research your family. So I'm doing how to research your family history in 30 minutes a day, and I'll be taking them through a really simplified version of Research Like a Pro.
Well, that sounds fun. I think a lot of people will be interested in that. So good luck.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think we'll probably put a link to it somewhere on our website or in our newsletter, so you guys can find where to watch that if you are interested. Well, for announcements today, we have got registration opening today. This podcast comes out on December 13th, and Research Like a Pro with DNA Study Group registration has opened. So if you're interested, be sure to go in and take advantage of the early bird price, which is $3.99 until January 15th. And the dates for that are February 16th to May 18th. That will be meeting weekly on Wednesdays, but we are taking 2 weeks off in that period of time. So we're going to take off a week for Roots Tech, and then we'll be taking a week off at the end of April when we do our research lesson and assignment, so that you'll have an extra week to research. This is something that has been widely requested from our study group members, that they just need a little bit more time to research. So we're excited to offer a couple of extra break weeks to catch up on assignments and have more time to get some things done. So be sure to get in on the early bird price. After January 15th, it will be $450, so you'll want to get that good deal if you're interested. And then, as we've been talking about, if you want to do our regular study group without DNA, that will be in the fall, and that will begin in September. Now, if you are feeling like you'd like to be a peer group leader, we have the application on our website, and you get a complimentary registration, and you can read all about the requirements and what your responsibilities would be on our website. So just go to the RLP with DNA study group to learn more. And as always, join our newsletter for coupons to get our best deals.
Yeah, we're super excited to open up registration today. We have got a lot of great feedback from the last study group about how we can make little tweaks, little improvements. So we'll be implementing those. In the last group, everyone said their most favorite thing was the small peer groups that met together. So when you join the study group, you'll be put into a group of about 5 people with a peer group leader, and you get to talk about your project and just ask any questions and talk together about how things are going. And that has turned out to be one of the most favorite things.
Yeah, it's been great. And the fun thing is that everyone comes with a variety of experience. So sometimes we get really experienced genealogists who don't know much about DNA. And then on the flip side, we get really experienced genetic genealogists who are not as good with the records. And so those peer groups allow you to share your strengths and help someone else. And it's just been wonderful to see the growth that comes from that.
Well, today we're excited to talk about how your project went in the last DNA study group. I think this is our last podcast episode about your Dillard project, right? Because we're talking about your report.
Yep, we're wrapping it up today. And even though I only did 8 blog posts and 8 podcasts about it, there are 12, study group sessions. I just combined a few things. So I know some people have been kind of confused, like, wait, I'm falling behind. I'm not keeping up with you. But that's just because I've combined some things. I actually did every step. Just wanted to condense to 8 for the purpose of writing and discussing it.
Yeah. So, with the final step of Research Like a Pro with DNA, we write a report. So, this is an important step for wrapping up your research session so that you don't forget all the connections you made, everything you learned. Writing a report is the perfect way to not only make sense of the research, but to correlate all your findings, compare and contrast different pieces of information, maybe that are conflicting, and also to compare, the information found in the documents with the evidence that you've gained from the DNA analysis. So it's a great way to put everything together and to see what progress you've made.
It really is. And I have a love-hate relationship with writing reports. When I'm thinking about getting started, I'm thinking, oh, I don't want to write everything up. But then once I get going, I can't stop because it's so fun to get everything put together.
Yeah, it's a bit of like an adrenaline rush when you get going and you're like pulling everything in and you're seeing things in a new way almost.
Yeah, it really is awesome. And in the study group, we do have everyone start writing more at the beginning. It's not like we wait till the very end. So I was able to take a lot of the things that I had previously written and pull them into the report, which was really nice. So I wasn't starting at square one. So let's just do a really quick recap. I know everybody can probably tell me all about my project who's been listening, but just to remind you, I am working on my brick wall. Cynthia Dillard's my third great grandmother, and don't know who her father is. I had previously done a lot of documentary work trying to find candidates or search every record, and just kind of kept coming up with this blank slate. And so finally turned to DNA, and I'm using the DNA of her great grandson, Victor Parker. He is my second cousin twice removed. He is that golden ticket of genetic genealogy where he has received much more DNA because of being so close to her generationally. And so it's been really great using his DNA. And I am working on this project in phases. With DNA, we often have to do several phases to get to reaching our objective. And so my current objective is to test the hypothesized biological sibling connection between Elijah Dillard and Cynthia Dillard Royston. So I had discovered Elijah through a network graph of Victor Parker's DNA and found this little cluster of people that were all going back to Elijah. And looking at his birth and his placement in Alabama, he seemed like a possible sibling to Cynthia. So that in a nutshell is what I've been trying to do with this project.
As you were talking, I was just trying to picture your lucid chart. How many matches did you find coming down from him?
I started out with 3 coming
Nice.
down from Elijah, and they were 3 separate lines through one of his sons, Josiah, and then 3 of his children.
Nice.
That was fairly good. And they were separate trees. So, sometimes when you're working with DNA, you find a group of family members who've all tested and they're all using the same tree.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice because these were 3 completely different trees that all had connected back. And so that gave me a little bit more confidence that the common ancestor of that cluster was Elijah. But I still wanted to work with the documentary evidence and then keep working with the DNA to see what I could find.
Cool. So as we write up our reports, we usually have the same sections and in most of them, of course, starting with the objective, then discussing the limitations of the research session, the results summary, which is kind of optional, but you can put a list of all of the things that were accomplished during the session and use action verbs, then documentary background information and DNA background information. And then you have the research findings. And sometimes you can split those up by documentary versus DNA findings, or you can weave them together, and then a conclusion, and then future research suggestions. So we do have a template for the report, but it's pretty bare because you have these different sections, but you really can decide how you want to organize the material depending on the project. Often the biggest challenge is just deciding what you want to include in your findings section. Do you list every documentary search that you did, or should you just focus on the ones where you found something relevant? Do you want to include every DNA tool that you tried or used? Maybe, maybe not. You may want to curate the information you put into your report instead of putting everything. And Diana's going to tell us how she curated her research and organized the report. And that's not the only way that you can do it. It's just that each project has a way that works best for it. So every session is unique, and you can treat what you find in different ways depending on your style and your preference and your audience.
It would be really fun to give a group of people the same exact research and see how they write it up. We'd have such different reports. Wouldn't that be fun to see the different ways that you can organize and present findings?
Yeah, with the DNA practicum at SLIG, it was kind of interesting to see how everyone went about it in a different way. And we got to read each other's reports a little bit, and it was interesting because everyone was different.
You're right. I completely forgot about that. That was really fun to see the difference in writing up the very same research. Yeah, that was awesome. And that is one fun thing about the study group is getting to read other people's reports and getting ideas. I learn something every single time I get ideas from other people.
Right, and it's fun to see the different formatting options too because, some people are really savvy with tables or with putting in different figures and how they label their figures, and there's just all these different ways to do things to make it easier and more clear to present your findings. So it is really fun to learn from each other.
It is. The first thing we put in is the objective. This gives the reader a clear picture of what the research was to entail. So if I'm writing this for a client, it reminds the client about what they hired me to do. What was the objective? And if it's for yourself, it can help you remember what the focus was for this phase of the research. And sometimes when I go to write the final report, I will tweak my objective just a little bit because I've discovered something or I just decide I want to add a little bit more information. So in this case, I did do that. I had found in the research that neither Elijah or Cynthia had a firm birth year, of course. That so often happens when we're just relying pretty much on census records. And Elijah did have death records, but those, of course, didn't agree with census records. So I did tweak it because I thought it might be less confusing and might help the reader. So let me just read what I actually ended up writing. So I said, this research phase aims to test the hypothesized biological sibling connection between Elijah Dillard and Cynthia Dillard Royston. Elijah Dillard was born between 1813 and 1818 in Georgia and died on 6 September 1886 in Coffee County, Alabama. Cynthia was born between 1815 and 1818 and died in 1882 in Collin County, Texas. Cynthia married Thomas Beverly Royston about 1833 in Georgia or Alabama. So, what do you think about that?
I think that's helpful to adjust the ranges. I guess my preference is to leave the objective because I've experimented with this. Sometimes I will tweak it and other times I will leave it. But I kind of like having the objective be the same as it was when you started. I kind of feel like it shows what you thought you knew and then, what you discovered. I think it's
True.
especially important, this is a report to yourself, so it's fine. But when you're doing it for clients, you need to, I think, really need to keep the objective as it was at the beginning so that they see this was the objective, but here's what we found that's like a little
Yeah,
different from the objective.
absolutely. And that's a good example of how each project can be a little bit different. So you're right. Just after I had finished it, I thought, I am not very clear on those birth dates. I'm just going to put that in there for myself. So I can look back and remember the birth ranges for them.
So the next section is the limitations, and all researchers operate under limitations like time, availability of records, and so forth. And then when DNA is added, we have limitations from which test takers we have, the types of DNA tests that are applicable to the research objective, and so forth.
Right. And I think this is such a good section to include, especially with DNA. It helps to clarify some things. So, I didn't obviously have a time limit on this. I could have gone as long as I wanted because this was for myself. But I did add up the time I spent on it using my Toggle app. And so I did put in my time. I put the project was limited to 25 hours for research and writing.
Oh, nice.
It was kind of fun to see how much time I spent. And then I put the documentary research was limited to records available online. So even though I could have gone to the family history library and researched the things I really wanted to do on my plan, I was able to do online. Then I wrote, why DNA will not apply for this project, as Cynthia Dillard Royston does not carry the male-only Y chromosome. Mitochondrial DNA will not apply for this project, as the tester Victor Parker did not inherit mitochondrial DNA from Cynthia Dillard Royston. And then finally, autosomal DNA analysis was limited to the DNA of Victor Parker, Cynthia's great-grandson.
So great. So the next section was the results summary. Usually this is created last, and you kind of use it to summarize everything that was found without citations, just a quick bulleted list of what was found and what was done using action verbs.
Right. I ended up with 12 bullet points. So I'll just read a couple of the bullet points. I'm not going to go through all 12. I put analyze a Gephi network graph for only the Royston-Dillard lines and discovered a cluster independent of the pedigree collapse that had Elijah Dillard, 1816 to 1886, as the most recent common ancestor. Hypothesized this could be a brother for Cynthia Dillard Royston. So I just did a little summary there of what I would talk more about in the report. And then one of the bullet points for documentary research, I wrote, searched Alabama probate records and found a possible connection in Edmund Dillard of Pike County, Alabama, reasoned that Elijah may have settled in Pike County in the 1850s because of this connection. So, it's always fun to write the results summary because you don't have to cite everything. You'll be doing your citations when you talk about it in the report. And it's just nice to give a preview of what they're going to read next.
The next section is the background information, and this is where you talk about what was known previously, and were there any family stories that were contributing to this objective? What is the purpose of this project? And then also giving some background on the DNA information, just to let the reader know where we started.
Right. So because I had previously done some projects on discovering Cynthia's father, I was able to cite my own work, which is really nice. I did a simple summary of those projects. And then I also cited the family Bible pages that disproved George W. Dillard as her father. And so here's what I wrote. Who was the father of Cynthia Dillard Royston? Previous research explored the possibility that George W. Dillard, born about 1781 in Virginia and died 1854 in Lee County, Alabama, was Cynthia's father. Indirect evidence supported this hypothesis: the proximity of residences in Alabama, the 1820 and 1830 census records showing a female of Cynthia's age in the George Dillard household, and naming patterns between the two families. This hypothesis was proved wrong with the discovery of a family Bible listing marriages for the children of George W. Dillard, none of whom were Cynthia, born about 1815. Instead, the Dillard female born in 1815 was Mariah L. Dillard, married to James Kivlin. So, and of course, I had the citations backing that up. But that gave me the ability in that short paragraph or two just to explain all the work I'd done before.
Yeah, that's perfect. You can also talk about the DNA background information, and this is a great chance to just talk about what you already know about your testers, how they're related to each other, any matches that are already identified, and things like that.
This was my opportunity to talk about my tester, Victor Parker, and the importance of using his DNA, because I imagine there would be people reading this that don't understand that, and so I wanted to point that out. And I included in my report an image of the Leeds method analysis, which showed the pedigree collapse in Victor's lines. And then I also did 3 images of the Gephi network graph to show the clustering used to find the Dillard cluster. And I always try to do a little bit of introduction to each image or figure to help the reader know what's coming and then see the image. And then I also caption the image so that it's clear what they're looking at. I have found that to be a really effective way to use images. One of the things that I've seen that's kind of a problem in writing about DNA is sometimes we put in so many images and figures of diagrams without much explanation, and you're left looking at it wondering what in the world you're looking at. So it's a really important thing to do when writing about DNA, is to really clearly explain whatever image you are showing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good to discuss your figures in the narrative. Use a call out. Figure 2 is showing blah, blah, blah. That really helps the reader to know what they're looking at.
Right.
Next, you can talk about your findings. So you've covered the background information, and now you can talk about either the documentary research or the DNA research, or you can just do both. How did you decide to organize that?
I decided to do the documentary research first and then to do the DNA research. Sometimes I weave it back and forth, especially with an adoptee case. I will talk about like a cluster and do the DNA evidence and then talk about the genealogy that backs that up. It just depends on the project. But in this project, it seemed better just to go through all the documentary first. My research plan had been to learn more about Elijah Dillard. He was that common ancestor in the peach cluster, and I really wanted to work on his records and see if there were any connections to him and Cynthia, or anything that gave him a connection to a father. So I had already made a table with a summary of known facts in the research planning stage. So I just took that and inserted it into this section of the report, and it included the citations. That was just easier for me. Sometimes I write that all out and that can be helpful, but for this case, I kind of wanted to be time sensitive. So I simply inserted my table. And then I pointed out in the narrative that Elijah had lived in 5 counties, and I showed a map and gave the context of that, and basically talked about how Elijah had moved into Macon County after its formation from the Creek Cession of 1832. And I talked a little bit about how after that land was ceded to the United States government, that a flood of settlers came in to patent that land, and Elijah was part of that. And so I wrote some background information up on that. And then I talked all about my findings from the probate land and court research. And this was so interesting because I had these high hopes that I would find, in Macon County, which was Elijah's earliest known residence, I'd find a man who could be his father. And guess who I found?
George.
I found George W. Dillard and his family. They were the only ones besides Elijah in all the records. And so it just made me think, okay, maybe there still is a connection between George and Cynthia and Elijah. Maybe these are his niece and nephew, and they were living with him at one point in time, or there's a connection. Or maybe there's no connection, it's just coincidence. It's on to more research, right? So then I researched Pike County because that's where Elijah lived after his marriage for the rest of his life. And sometimes, in people's death records or obituaries, you get clues to their origins. And there was a county history for Pike County. And so I wrote a paragraph distilling some of the interesting things that I found about Pike County. I learned that his little area that he lived in of Spring Hill really had mostly settlers from Georgia, which makes sense because his records always said he was born in Georgia. And also I learned that this area, it was a poor part of Alabama with few slaves, mostly white settlers. So a little bit different than up in Chambers County where Cynthia was living, where they did have a plantation and did have slaves working that. So that was a difference between the two. And I had to come to a conclusion. I unfortunately did not find anything specific for a father. I found this possible Edmund Dillard who had died in Pike County. And maybe that's why Elijah was in Pike County. Maybe there's a connection there. So he's a possible future research connection. But I went ahead and wrote up a conclusion. This is what I wrote. The objective of this project was to find connections between Elijah Dillard and Cynthia Dillard Royston, To this point, the documentary research has shown no family or associates that connect the two hypothesized siblings. Cynthia first appears in the records with the 1850 census of Chambers County, Alabama. She lived in Chambers County until her move to Collin County, Texas, between 1870 and 1880. Chambers County is only separated from Pike County, where Elijah resided the majority of his life, by Macon County. The dearth of early records for both Elijah and Cynthia could point to several situations: a father's early death and lack of probate records for his estate, children left orphans being raised in different households, record loss due to burn counties, and more. Continued work in the DNA may point to additional clues to Cynthia and Elijah's origins. So basically, I just concluded that documentary research section and writing up that summary and then transitioned to DNA.
Nice. You mentioned this Edmund Dillard. Was he old enough to be a father figure or?
I think so. He seemed to die in the 1840s. And when I looked at it, I wasn't sure. He did not leave a lot of records, and I need to dive into really doing a good research project, probably just on him.
Yeah, that's a good next step.
Yeah, he was the only other Dillard in Pike County. We follow up on these leads and these connections. So,
And does George W. Dillard have known parents?
yes, he does. I believe he has been traced back to Virginia, and I'm not sure how solid that research is.
That would be interesting to see if there's any brothers of his that could have been the father.
Yeah, that's another really good hypothesis. So, even though it can be disappointing when you don't find something really conclusive, you just keep going, right? You just keep getting clues to keep working with.
Oh, and I think you found some great clues that are going to lead you to hopefully some answers.
Agreed.
Well, what did you put in the next section about your DNA research?
I had done a lot of work on the documentary, and I'd already done some of the DNA work before, with identifying the cluster for Elijah Dillard. But I wanted to see if I could identify any more people in that cluster, because I had a cluster of about 20 people and only 3 had trees that go back to a Dillard. So I did some work with that cluster again, and I was able to find another match, this time through a different son of Elijah. The previous matches had all been through Josiah, and then I found another match through his oldest son, James Dillard. So that was great, having an independent match, another line coming down through Elijah, which is super helpful. We're always looking for those independent lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about James was I found a Florida connection. And it's always bugged me that when Cynthia Dillard's children's death certificates, 3 of her 14 children lived long enough into the 1900s to have a death certificate. Well, they all said Dillard, and 2 of them said Alabama for her birthplace, which that's the only place they knew. She always said she was born in Georgia. But then one of them said that she was born in Florida. And I always just thought that is so weird and random. Well, this James Monroe Dillard actually lived in Florida after 1920, maybe. And these death certificates were in the 1930s. And I thought, I wonder if these would have been first cousins. Is it possible that cousins kept in contact and they knew of this cousin who was living in Florida, and so they assumed maybe she was born in Florida? That is maybe just way out there in conjecture, but it was a connection that I had never found before with anything to Florida. And the interesting thing that this location is the Florida Panhandle. So it's just directly south of Alabama. So maybe there's other family members that were down there in that area. I don't know. It just opened my mind a little bit to a new possibility.
Absolutely.
Found that through DNA and then returned to genealogy, made more connections. So that's what I found for this project.
So the next section of our report is the conclusion. What did you conclude?
I, of course, would have loved to have researched another 20 hours on this, but it was time to wrap everything up. And so I concluded that further research on both documentary records and DNA is needed to continue exploring the connection between Cynthia and Elijah. So, once again, I kind of recapped everything I'd done with the documentary and DNA, and it made that conclusion that we just need to do more research. And the conclusion doesn't need citation, so it's a chance to once again lead the reader through with some narrative and clarify the most important points.
Then you can do the suggestions for future research. You can put anything that you didn't complete in your research plan and then any new ideas that came during the research. Tell us what you put there.
I like to divide that up by the DNA research and the documentary research. And as I'm writing the report, I will often end a little section with further research could explore this connection, like with that Edmund Dillard. And then one of the things that I like to do is right when I write that is to skip down and put that in future research right then so I don't forget about it. And, of course, you can just go back through your report and find all those ideas, but it's nice to have them listed out as you're going.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about them during the body of the report. If you find a clue, then mention that you want to pursue it in future research rather than never mentioning it in the body and only putting it in the future research. I think it's helpful to have it in both places.
I agree because it helps the reader realize, oh, okay, yeah, there's more to be done on this. It doesn't just leave you hanging, as
Yeah.
you're reading it, wondering what you're going to do with this little piece of information you figured out. I've talked a lot about the future research I want to do for documentary, like tackling Edmund, and I had more counties to look out for Elijah. I had a really nice list. But for the DNA research, I wanted to expand the autosomal tester base, and I wanted to look and see if there were other descendants of Cynthia who could have a similar close connection like Victor, see if I could find another close generational person and look at their DNA results. So either have them test or share. And then I, of course, want to continue working with that peach cluster. I also thought it would be great to see if I could get a male descendant of Elijah Dillard who could do Y-DNA testing and see if he matched up to maybe a George Dillard Y-DNA candidate. That would be a really good use of Y-DNA testing to see if they're going back on the same lines. And then I still have that Gephi graph, which has a lot of clusters, and I could keep working on identifying more clusters. So much more to be done on this with the DNA, which is exciting. It's so good to know you're not at a dead end. There's something to do.
Yeah, I love your ideas. I think that'll be great. Well, good job on finishing this phase of the research on the Dillards, and thank you for sharing all of those pieces of your report. That's fun to hear those sections, and good luck to everybody out there who's doing DNA research and trying to write a report about it. You can do it.
Right, and on the blog post, I have uploaded my entire report. So if you want to go and read it, the PDF is there on the blog post in Family Locket about report writing. So you can go and read it and give me some feedback. So good luck, everybody. Have a great week.
All right. We look forward to seeing all of you in future study groups so that you can do the same.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist Guide, on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our Research Like a Pro online course or join our next study group. Learn more at FamilyLocket.com. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our e-course or study group. If you like what you heard and would like to support this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.